Hello everyone, welcome back. It is Bobby here, and today I wanted to share with you a dashboard I decided to create. And this is one I decided to make because I am a huge fan of Major League Baseball. I always have been. So I had a lot of fun making this one, and I had found some data. I came across it that had various hitting data from over the course of over a century, which is I found quite impressive, as well as pitching data from, of course, the same thing, well over a century. It was very cool data for me to come across, so I decided to make something with it. So let's get started here. The questions I was trying to ask myself when I was thinking about what I wanted to visualize was how hitting has evolved or changed over the course of the years. Has it become better for hitters? Are hitters becoming more successful as time goes on? Are hitters becoming less successful as time goes on? And other sort of stuff like that and how it's changing. I also decided to do the same thing with pitching. Are pitchers getting the better advantage over the hitters? And how is that affecting the hitters? Are they becoming easier to hit off of? And the similar related topics like that. So let's get started here. I decided to make this, by the way, this is IBM Cognos Analytics. This is 11.1. So let's get started here. I decided to start with the hitting stat trends over time. So let's get started. So on the big one right here, we have the big line plot. And keep in mind, these are trends over time that I was really trying to learn. So naturally, I decided to use quite a bit of line plots, line graphs, if you will. So the first master graph, I decided to call it here. I included 4 different stats to be tracked over the course of I believe as early as 1871, which is amazing that they have statistics for those seasons all that long ago, as late as 2012. The 2012 regular. This is all regular season stats, by the way. So we have in the orange, we have at-bats. That is the most over-encompassing for hitting because that is every time that they're coming up to hit minus, walks, whenever they walk or get hit by a pitch or similar, something like that. So you can see here the trends. I was actually pleasantly surprised, well, not pleasantly, but in general, a little surprised about how linear hitting actually is in terms of the trends, and as I'll explain here. So you can see at bats, we have some outliers that I'll explain, but overall you can see over time as the century plus goes on, you can see, well, it's really hitters are getting more at bats as time goes on. I wonder why. Was it because they were playing more games? Had they been playing less than 162 games a season, which is the regular season standard today, back then, were they playing less? I'd have to figure that out that's the next question after I look at, study these charts. So and then next we go to hits, which is in blue on this chart right here. Again, you can see it follows a similar pattern, as well as base hits. Now, base hits are not the same as extra base hits. Those are singles. Base hits are just singles. Now, on the yellow line at the bottom, we have extra base hits, which is less common, of course, because those are your doubles, triples, and your home runs all added together. So you can see, as we get into like the 60s going on, there are more at-bats happening exponentially more. Just exponentially more. And what I mean by when I said earlier how it was a lot more linear than I had thought it would be, as you can see, it's actually following suit. Hits are going up, not exponentially like this, but it's definitely a steady climb, as well as singles and extra base hits in the master graph. So I decided to throw in some key indicators in the top right. Total hits over the course of every team, every player added up over the course of the season. You can also filter here. Extra base hits, average players' batting average, and base hits. Now let's go down to the bottom left. I decided to isolate some measures. Total extra base hits, and if we look a little closer, Again, it's a little linear. You have some up and downs, but it does go up as time goes on. So you start to ask yourself, okay, well, are hitters just overall just getting better? Are they just, doing more? Or is it just because they're getting more opportunities, like here in the at-bats shown? And now we have a comparison with just the hits and the extra base hits. Now, interestingly enough, extra base hits is not climbing like your singles are, or your total hits, my mistake. Now, a bigger graph I decided to show total hits over time. Remember, this is all types of hits: singles, doubles, triples, home runs. Zoomed in, you can see the average is this number, 25,700 plus. And it goes up, of course. 60s going on. It starts to go exponentially higher. I will get into this one last. Total singles, your single base hits, a steady climb, again, fairly linear. And I have it now compared total hits to singles. So you can see here the hits. And base hits very much follows suit. It's very linear, which I was surprised. I would have thought there would have been a little bit more differences, but I guess it is what it is when I'm seeing the data. So let's go back to this really quick. We have average player batting average, and I found this to be one of the most interesting data points I actually found when I was putting this together and when I analyzed it. The batting averages aren't changing a whole lot, actually. We're sitting around the 250, 260 mark, which tells me that, well, if it's not changing, hitters aren't necessarily any more successful or less successful than they have been as the years go on, right? For those who don't know, batting average is hits over total hits over total at-bats. So if you're talking just get the ability to get hits as an average, hitters aren't necessarily less successful or more successful, which speaks to, the tradition or the staticness of how successful you can be in hitting, at least if you measure it that way by batting average itself. Interesting. I found that very interesting. Now, really quickly, I decided to add a crosstab summary mini report, if you will. So if you want to isolate, see what's going on by years, here you have it. You can filter by any year. Now, really quickly, before we go on to the pitching, I just want to point out, there are some outliers. And I asked, well, what was happening? So, for example, we see at-bats. We'll take this orange graph, for example. You have some dips in the more recent years. So why would this year, for example, be so much lower? Now, this data point, I believe that's 1981, and for those who don't know, there was actually a strike. It ended the season short. So it's like, okay, well, that explains why there was so many less at-bats going on that year, as well as this point right here, which is 1994. For those who don't know, 1994 was the strike. There was no playoffs that season, and the regular season was cut a little short because of a salary strike that had happened that year, to explain. Now let's go on. We're going to go to the pitching side of things. I decided to go with a very similar format for this. So let's get right into this. I just go with total innings pitched, outs over time, hits allowed, earned runs, walks. So we have innings pitched, as you can see here. Again, there's a lot of similarities going on, actually. Very linear, following one another. Except for these two, actually, which is earned runs, which is pitchers allowing runs to be scored by the opposing team, and strikeouts that pitchers are getting. Interestingly enough, earlier in the sports, youth, I should say, there were a lot more. It was very even, strikeouts to earned runs. But as time went on, you see more hitters began to strike out more than earning runs. And I think I have a proposition or an inference as to why that was happening. So we have our key indicators. I decided to go with innings pitched outs, for example, hits allowed, earned runs allowed, and strikeouts. Now, I want to point right to this real quick. ERA, that is earned run average, that is the average per 9 innings that pitchers are allowing runs by the opposing team. Now, interestingly here, again, the average, things aren't changing too much. It's getting a little more consistent as time goes on. But again, that just speaks to what I showed you before with hitters' batting average. The difficulty of being able to get hits hasn't necessarily changed a whole lot. Likewise, with pitchers being able to allow less or more runs, it's not changing a whole lot. You can see it's going up and down, but there's no trend over the long term. I found very interesting. Total strikeouts over the years, it's going up. I'll explain that in a second. And then K to walk ratio, you can see here, again, it's very even. They're almost very similar, but as time goes on, the walks are going up a little bit, but much more strikeouts. Total earned runs allowed, it's going up, but I suspect that is because there was more innings being pitched, hence, and more at-bats happening. Total earned runs or home runs allowed, earned runs up, home runs growing. But I really wanted to get into this right here. We have, actually right here, strikeouts, which actually gives me the thought that of why I believe it's because as time goes on, there's become more an emphasis on power hitting, more extra base hits, if you will, more home runs, and overall, what does that really mean in micro? Bigger swings from players, high risk, high reward, right? So there's become more an emphasis on getting extra base hits and power hitting, which if you are a Major League Baseball fan, you kind of figured that's how it was because there are more home runs happening, especially in recent years. But here you can see just how it's happening over the decades, slowly but surely. More hitters striking out, but there are more home runs, so which I found very interesting. But at the same time, the batting averages aren't necessarily changing a whole lot. So it may be more strikeouts, but overall success to get hits out of their at-bats, it's not changing a whole lot. Interesting thing. So I decided to include another similar crosstab, very similar format. This is for hitting. This is for pitching stats. If you wanted to filter by a certain year, for example, you can. Let's take the year. I don't know. Let's take a recent year. Let's take 2010. This is the year the San Francisco Giants won for the first time in quite a while. And you can see right here your key indicators for that specific season. And yeah, that's that. So with that concludes my presentation. And now, of course, the next questions will be, well, what's happening? What would I want to be answered now? Like, what are the questions posed that I would try to make another dashboard for to learn from? So how has power hitting evolved over the years? So you could see more strikeouts, more swing and miss because they are trying to swing for more power, for more home runs. And I would want to know, how has the ratios changed from singles to power hitting? That would be one question I would want to answer, and how is that affected? And that will, So with that will conclude my presentation. Thank you everyone for listening, and until next time, thank you very much.